metaverse.
Greetings, I am Shad and I'm here at the Cryal Castle Medieval Festival, but I'm here with also a familiar face. This is Michelle, who I met at the Abbey Medieval Festival, and she has come all the way down from Queensland here and has a wonderful display here. Now, I had a talk with Michelle at the Abbey Medieval Festival about medieval medicine, and I want to continue that discussion because what she has here are specific ingredients that were used in the medicine kind of practices of the time, and some are very bizarre and strange. And I really want to find out what on earth they felt these things did and if they were effective, if they were not. But first of all, Michelle, thank you for joining us.
Welcome. Yeah, it's good to actually have my full setup.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because at the Abbey Festival, you were doing multiple things, weren't you?
Yeah, so majority of the time at the Abbey Festival this year, I was a hunter and master of dogs. So looking after the dogs with some of the stuff that you fed them and looked after them with, which is a fairly small display compared to what I do when I'm actually doing my medieval medicine and surgery. So,
and yeah, you have everything here. It was such a great discussion at the Abbey Festival, and I'm really grateful that we can continue it on. And so I'm looking at some of these things, that there's herbs, but there's also other things that you wouldn't expect. Could you point out, and perhaps we'll go some one at a time or even just a group, because there's some odd things I'm looking at right here.
There's definitely some things that would not be considered to be part of herbal medicine, because medicine could be anything and everything. So parts of animals got used quite regularly.
And I mean, I can see leeches.
Yes, leeches for bleeding, definitely. So nice little leeches to go on. They were a nice gentle way of bleeding as opposed to using the phlegm and bleeding into a bleeding bowl. You might put a couple on them, but you'd have if you had a problem on, say, your left arm, I might put them on your right arm to try and help draw the humours from one side to the other.
And so we mentioned this in the previous video. There's like a medicinal theory during the medieval time called humours, where there were 4 parts of the body that they felt needed to be in balance, and the one was like phlegm, bile, and what were the other 2?
So phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and blood.
And so they were following this theory when it comes to bleeding, and then leeches comes into it. Not the correct kind of way to treat many things, but there were also, of course, leeches.
Some things would work, and other things would be not beneficial at the best.
So what are some of these other strange things that we're looking at here?
Well, I've got a few different things. So I've got some verdigris, which is a type of copper oxide.
So what would they use this then for, verdigris?
For medicinal things, it was quite often used in making ointments, especially for eye problems, so eye infections. And it actually does have antibacterial properties. So that could work quite well. I've got some medicinal clay called Terra Siglata. It's supposed to be clay that comes from the island of Lemnos. Probably a lot of fakery went on because it was quite expensive, and if you got some clay in your backyard that looks similar, you try to sell it off as that.
And so why did they think that helped? Because I'm guessing clay wouldn't do much. What did they use it for?
Well, some clays can help. Kaolin is a type of clay, and that's used in a lot of face masks. It's actually can be used in some of the stuff that you drink to actually try and help with stomach ulcers and stuff like that. Even now, you'll see kaolin clay in some things. This particular clay, Guy the Chiliac, who was a 14th century medical practitioner, he liked it for nosebleeds, sore swollen feet, and gout.
Did it work for any of those?
Probably not. One of the ones that intrigues people, I've got some dried earthworms there.
Dried earthworms?
Yes. Roger Frugard advocated dried earthworms for injured nerves in the neck.
Huh. I mean, it's protein.
Yes.
There's that.
He also was very much onto he liked the idea of something called laudable pus, which some people in medieval times, well, doctors in medieval times thought was a really good thing, that you wanted to have pus. Pus was required for a wound to heal. And some, like Roger, actually felt that you induced pus was even better because he guaranteed it was going to heal. So an abdominal wound, he writes about putting strips of bacon into that wound to force pus to form, and then you got better healing.
And I'm assuming that would just cause infection, and that's why where the pus comes from.
At the same time, you had Hugh and Theodoric of Lucca were using vinegar. And they said, no, you don't want pus to form. You've got to rinse it out with vinegar, or maybe old wine if if the vinegar's a little bit too strong, and we've got some old red wine there. And that
would actually sterilize a little bit.
And vinegar is actually quite good as an antiseptic.
So I find that so interesting, where you have two polar opposite theories.
Yep, writing at the same time.
At the same time.
Yep, and that's just the text that we have, as opposed to, there could have been others, but yeah.
I find that so interesting because there's examples of people just, I guess, is it making up? They're obviously following a logic where they think, no, this is doing something, okay? Pus is a natural reaction of the body, that's the body healing, so we can enhance it.
The humours are interacting, and that's where you get pus from.
Yeah.
Cataracts they didn't know that cataracts in your eye were actually the lens changing and the proteins becoming out of alignment. They thought it was humours coming from the front of your brain, coming down over the lens. So when they would use something like a couching needle and would put that in your eye and wriggle what we know is the lens down and out of the way, they thought they were just getting this film out of the way.
Oh no.
And so you could see again. Couching.
And would that permanently blind people?
No, you would be able to see.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to focus on things because you didn't have the lens anymore, but you could at least see, because if you've got cataracts and they're what they call mature, so they're fully formed, you're blind with that.
Yes, okay.
Cataracts are the leading cause of blindness in the world even today.
Wow, because I assumed removing the lens would blind, okay, because I don't know much about the eye, but the lens is just, and they were, oh wow, there you go.
Yeah.
It would do something.
Yeah, it would give you back some vision, which was better than none. There could be complications afterwards that you could lose your vision, but you were blind already, so
it's better than nothing.
Better than nothing.
Wow, again, then there are the theories that we don't know, but at least I find it really interesting that there were, people, medical practitioners, that actually had some type of stuff that would, act as disinfectant, antiseptic, like the vinegar and the wine.
Yep, some of the poultices and plasters. So a plaster is taking something like this one is bran flour mixed with olive oil, then be basically I'm going to put it on some strips of linen that I've got here, and that if someone's got a wound, I then place that over the wound to heal it. It actually does have a good effect.
Really?
People use bran poultices and that today, and some of the herbs they talk about putting them in could have really good antiseptic properties and stuff like that to help improve wound healing. So and honey was a very big thing used on a lot of wounds.
And the honey does work.
Yeah, and we know scientifically why honey works better than most things. So it definitely could work quite well.
All right, so I recognize the vial of urine we got to talk about in the previous video. Lovely. But I also recognize some feces, some poo.
Yes.
Could you care to explain that?
I have some fake feces there, and I'm really proud of them because they're squishy.
Yeah, that looks very real.
I only got them a few weeks ago, so I'm really, really glad to have them here. Yes, they look real. They did use anything and everything, so you'd get sheep's bile might be used and something to give to your patient to drink, because that was supposed to actually influence the humours. You might use goat's urine for leprosy, bull's dung for facial marks. You leave dog feces out in the sun enough and you get that white sort of stuff. That actually had a particular name, which I can't recall, and that would be used in certain remedies for things like gout and stuff like that.
Really?
So lots of animal parts would be used for things. Dog's brain mixed with wool to put on broken arms.
I'm laughing because it started to give me, I guess, an indication of where the witch's cauldron kind of thing comes, where they have these random ingredients where they're putting in to have certain effects, where a lot of these ingredients sound like those kind of random things, because I'm assuming a lot of times like the feces one perhaps doesn't work.
No. I have seen one website where they're like, but there'd be some things that might be antimicrobial in there. It's like, no, you might be able to get an antibiotic from some of the bacteria in there if you do all the modern day stuff we do, but not like that is.
Not like that.
No. My snakeskin here.
Yeah. What on earth was that used for?
Yes. There are a few different ones, but the main one I've got it there for is what they call a compounded medicine, which was called theriac. Compounded medicines are lots of different ingredients put together. A simple medicine is usually just one thing, like plantain. So a compounded medicine, this one called theriac, there's a lot of different combinations in the various recipes that you find. And some recipes call for over 30 different ingredients.
Wow.
All of them have snake flesh or snake skin in them because theriac was a universal antidote. So an antidote to poisonings and snake bites and dog bites and all that sort of stuff. So
it's like a potion. It's like making a magical potion with all these random ingredients.
So a good physician or apothecary would have some type of theriac, quite often in a really nice container and stuff like that. That if someone had been bitten by a snake, you'd give them some doses of theriac to try and help not have them get poisoned by the snake bite.
And I'm also guessing that didn't work either.
Well, we are talking European snakes, which when you compare them to Australian. And there's also the thing of dry bites. So a snake can bite you, but not envenomate you.
And so
you give the patient the theriac.
It's like, what's that term for a
placebo?
Placebo. It's like a placebo almost. Where they just...
So you weren't actually going to get a problem, but you felt as though that medicine did work.
And then it could give false positives, which make people think it works, and then it gets perpetuated. And what was the name of that again?
Theriac.
Theriac. See, that is such an interesting thing to know that I could see myself including that in my medieval fantasy stories that I write. That as like, this is the standard kind of medicine that people, because it's a fantasy, I could actually make it to have some type of effect.
Another good one would be looking up Mithridates.
Mithridates.
Yes, Mithridates was, the legend of him is he was a king who was trying to resist the Romans and he was so worried about someone poisoning him, he would take little tiny bits of every known poison to make himself immune to it. Probably wouldn't work in real life because it's a story. And then apparently when the Romans finally defeated him and he was sort of about to get taken over in his palace, he's like, I'm going to poison all my children, my wives and stuff like that, so they can't be taken alive, and I'm going to poison myself, and oh, that's right, I've been taking all this stuff so I can't be poisoned, and now I can't poison myself. So he had to stab himself to kill himself. And then it sort of ended up being spoken about in Roman writings, and then goes on up until Renaissance time, the Mithridatic or Mithridates formula, which was a great way to basically treat any poison.
There we go. So what was it? It was
Mithridates?
Mithridates, and it was something they made to try and treat poisons.
It was pretty much supposed to be able to prevent any poison from killing you. So if you were a king and you thought that someone might try to poison you, that was a good thing to have.
But you could have a lot of fun adapting that, where if you did have an actual potion that did prevent poisoning, there's a medieval reference that you could call it Mithridates. Mithridates. And theriac is the general kind of get well medicine. And it's great to have these little points of reference that have historical basis that you could integrate into the thing. And speaking of fantasy, we have this, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
I've got a lot of fakes here. Sometimes people would might sell the clay from Lemnos, saying, well, it's from Lemnos, but it's not really, or other things would be faked. Mandrake root would quite often be faked because mandrake was quite expensive. If you could take like a parsnip and make it look like a mandrake and dry it out, that's a lot cheaper, and you could sell it for a lot more expensive. Now,
did mandrake actually have medicinal properties?
It does. It actually does have some compounds in it that can make you not quite as aware of things and stuff like that. Take too much of it, you might not live. This is the ultimate in fakery.
Yes.
We know they didn't exist.
So what is this one, Michelle?
It's called an alicorn in the text that I've got. It's a unicorn horn.
Unicorn. And so they called unicorns alicorns.
I don't know if they called them alicorns, but some of the bestiaries do call them alicorns. So, so this is when you're getting up until the late 14th, 15th.
Yep.
And the idea was, if someone had poisoned your drink or your food, you just touch that to your drink and it would neutralise any poison in it.
And you could get the whole kind of false positive practice, placebo kind of thing where people are just believing it does something.
Yep.
And then it, people take it and run with it.
There was a 15th century doctor who was like, it's not real. I've never met anyone who I actually believe who's ever seen one of these. I think they're all fake. I don't think they work. And people are like, no, they do work. Everyone believes they work. And he's like, so he did a whole series of very unethical trials where he took prisoners and poisoned them and used alicorn and stuff. And of course they died horrible deaths. And he's like, see, it doesn't work. And I was like, no, it works. You just don't know what you're talking about. It still works. And these are actually published things that we have, their writings.
I'm laughing because we see similar things in the modern day where there's an accepted kind of understanding that when someone comes forward to challenge it, there's so much pushback because, no, if this is the way it is, that means I'm wrong, my credibility could be damaged, and so they dig in their heels. And
there's one particular person apparently who was like, yes, I don't believe it works either, but we can't tell people it doesn't work because they want us to have it. They want us to have it and they want to believe that it works.
Yeah.
So we'll keep on telling them, and this other guy's going, but it doesn't work.
That's hilarious. And this is an actual historical point of reference to something that they did do. Yeah. And so if you do want to adapt something in fantasy, you could legitimately have real unicorn horns if they existed, and that could be like touch it to food and it cures it of poison as the effect.
Or you find out you got sold the fake one.
I'm totally using that in my book. Because I love finding the mythology of the past and then actually using historical kind of mythology in modern fantasy because it's grounded in where medieval fantasy comes from. And these are just brilliant points of reference that I'm genuinely loving. And because one of the other things that really kind of struck me is the witch, to my understanding, I might want to double check this, is another, word that means wise woman, essentially.
It can, yeah. In terms of witchcraft stuff, when you're looking at medieval, you've got to get to the 16th century before you start getting things like Malleus Maleficarum. My pronunciation's probably wrong. My Latin is terrible. That's when you start getting the link between witchcraft and the devil and Satanism and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, you had the Inquisitions, you had the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, so there's all this other stuff.
Yes. But that's what I've found as well, that the whole epic big witch burning thing is actually something that happened after the medieval period. It's more of a Renaissance thing that people ascribe to the medieval period.
And something I found out recently, and I can give you the reference for it later, is while some places like England, it was majority women, in some other places like it was either Denmark or Iceland, it was majority men who were accused of witchcraft and either usually hung if it was against the law, or burned if it was considered heresy.
But what I'm seeing here is kind of like the evolution through time, where I could see that perhaps the origins of a witch being a wise woman, meaning a medicine woman, meaning and a lot of the kind of practices where we think they're brewing a potion stuff, actually we can see some historical, foundation in all these different ingredients where they're brewing kind of stuff.
I've got my cauldrons over there.
Yep, exactly. And when that evolves past the medieval period, it's interesting because especially if there's a woman who actually finds a herb that actually does the effect that might challenge the medicine of the time, and she's doing something wrong, she's really poor, and then heretic and other things, and you can see kind of an evolution through time where.
Yeah. But also too, there's what they call an aphorism, which is like a saying. There's a lot of medical aphorisms, and one of them is. One dose is your cure, the other dose is your poison. So a lot of things like your mandrake, your poppy juice and that could be highly lethal if you use them wrong. Arsenic in small amounts is still used in some medicines today because it can be really good for certain things. You definitely don't want much of it.
Yes.
There's a lot of different things that could help you or harm you depending on the dose. The dose makes the cure or the kill.
And that is just so fascinating because, again, you can see how perhaps there were, medicine women that obviously started to get demonized, and then there's the injection.
You didn't save someone.
Exactly.
Or they thought maybe you poisoned them deliberately because you didn't like them.
Yep. Or it's having an effect so effective that it seems supernatural. Where are you getting this ability from? And then accusations of having dark supernatural effects, and it evolves, and then you get the whole kind of witchcraft mythology evolving out of it. But what's interesting, most of it is actually not medieval, it's Renaissance. Yep. Where if you go to the medieval origin, this was just standard medicine, it looks like.
You might have a remedy that while you're stirring it, you've got to stir it a certain number of times and say 3 paternosters. That actually works really well for the amount of time you need it to do that. Say paternosters and don't say like an old English Anglo-Saxon herb charm or something like that, because then that might be a bit, that's not of the church.
Oh, so paternoster. What's a paternoster?
Paternoster is a type of Roman Catholic
chant?
Prayer, sort of thing.
Okay.
Chant prayer.
Okay.
You got your Hail Marys and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of other sort of ones.
But that's actually very interesting as well.
You might have a saying that you've got to say a number of times that's appealing to a certain saint, because that saint's associated with that illness and that.
Yes.
I've got St. Roch on my badge here. St. Roch was the patron saint of plagues and dogs.
But
before the Black Death, so plagues were lots of different things.
The fact that they spoke certain things to get times, it sounds like a spell that they're trying to do.
So make sure it's the paternoster.
Exactly. If you say Old English or also something that no one understands. Yep. What are you speaking some devil language?
The elf charm might give you the same timing for how long you need it to boil, but it's probably not going to be as favoured as saying the Hail Marys or something along those lines.
This is just so fascinating.
So it's definitely a lot more complex and sort of involved than what a lot of people expect it to be, which is one of the fun things I have. And then I do silly things like translations of entire texts.
Oh, wow.
A number of these.
Did you do that?
No,
I was going to say.
Someone else did that.
Yes.
I can't read Latin. I can understand bits of it. If medical Latin, I can do it.
But that's a medical book translated into English of what period?
This one is 1350s. So
My
this
goodness,
is the major surgery of Guy de Chauliac.
That is such a phenomenal resource.
I have the surgery of Henry de Mondeville. I've got Roger of Palmer's surgery book, Albucaeus's surgery book, Avicenna's Canon of Medicine. I've got a number of Moses Maimonides was another one who wrote great books on diagnosis by pulse, poisons, and stuff like that. So I've got a number of those, so I can actually go through and look at the context and everything rather than someone else's, what they've pulled out of the things.
I love that.
General history, I've sort of gotten to the point I'm now trying to read the actual texts if someone else has been nice to translate them and go, and then there'll be times where it's like using silk for suturing up someone, and in Guy de Chauliac he's describing doing 2 sort of passes and then you come back and do another pass when you're doing suture. That's what we call a surgeon's knot. So he's literally describing a surgeon's knot with silk.
That's amazing.
In a mid-14th century text.
Because medieval medicine does get, I guess, criticised a lot, but then you find things like that where you find very viable, useful things that even reflected in the modern day. And so it wasn't all bad. No. It was a bit of a mixed bag. But again, one of the other things, and why I love coming to Renaissance fairs and meeting, people like Michelle, is that you were doing such a focused study on something that, or I have such a broad interest, so I would never have the time to just do such a deep dive reading a translation of medical text. But you have, and then you get to share it with everyone, and we get to benefit from it, and that's just wonderful.
I started out as a combatant, being a fighter, with the full chain, metal swords and everything, and in my real day-to-day work, I actually do surgery, and I can't afford injury. So when I was at university, I could. After university, I had to stop fighting and stuff like that. So I went, hang on. So what they did do.
Your professional career, just out of interest, what do you do?
I'm a veterinarian.
You're a veterinarian. That makes perfect sense.
I have the advantage that I do know how to pull teeth, suture. I literally less than 3 weeks ago, I amputated a leg.
Wow. Yep.
So some interesting sort of stuff. So I have the practical knowledge behind some of the things, and sort of the reading stuff like, oh, that's a surgeon's knot, or abdominal wound, intestines come out. You push them back in, you jiggle your patient to get them in the right spot, and that's exactly what we do now.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Some things don't change.
And one thing that I generally wasn't expecting in this video, it's basically kind of discovering the origin of witchcraft in medieval medicine. It's just by one of the things you're explaining here. And especially with some of these strange ingredients, could you quickly just point out some of the remaining weird ingredients that we haven't covered? Because
we have sulfur.
what on earth was that used for?
That's used in quite a few remedies. Certainly some of the ones for eyes and...
eyes?
Yeah, I know. I don't know about that one, how well that would work. I prefer the copper sulfate, copper oxide. Certainly for... I think there was ones for leg wounds and that. But when you get to the 14th century, this is also a little bit into the witchcraft, is when you start getting alchemy. So alchemy was introduced by the Arabs and that, and then taken to the next level. So 12th, 13th century, little bit. 14th, 15th, it becomes very popular. And sulfur and mercury were considered to be the base elements of everything. So everything was actually a mixture of some sort of mercury and sulfur.
Really?
And I sometimes will have fake mercury with me. Not today. Fake because it's toxic, so I've got to be careful.
Yes.
I don't really want to have that stuff. And they used mercury in medicines as well. A night later on, when we're into the Renaissance and you have syphilis going round, a night with Venus and a lifetime with Mercury.
Oh dear.
Mercury pills.
Oh dear,
And mercury pills don't get digested, they just go through your system and act as a purgative and a laxative, so everything comes out. You definitely want to be near the lavatory rather quickly, and then you collect it, because it comes out with everything else. You wash it and you put it aside for the next person that needs to use it.
Oh dear. It's funny, like, the medieval period wasn't the only period in which toxic things were used as medicine. You can find in the 1800s, there were many medicines that actually, because they discovered certain elements that glowed in the dark, and they thought that was a special thing, and so if you drank a liquid that had ground up elements of this glowing material, and I forget, it's obviously radioactive, but I forget.
Early 20th century, radioactive water was very popular.
I know, that's what I'm referring to, Adam. What was the name of it?
Radium.
Radium, that's it. Yes, they would drink radium as a medicine, and it's radioactive. Okay.
Electric's a little hand-cranked thing to electrify you to cure you as well.
And so the medieval period was not the only period in which they misunderstood things, okay? It's actually a very common thing. We're very lucky in the modern day with modern technology in which we can test things and know
and things like the TGA.
Yes.
No, that's toxic. No, you're not allowed to.
And we still get things wrong in the modern day. But don't just get critical on the medieval period for their mistakes. There's no mistakes across the whole human experience when it comes to medicine. And of course, it's just the medieval period gets a hard rap.
And some stuff could be similar. So I've got feverfew and meadowsweet here, and willow bark would be another one that goes with this. They're three plants that have a high amount of a thing called salicylic acid in them. Acetyl salicylic acid is a synthesized form of that, which is aspirin.
Oh, really?
So you take one of those and they will give you a similar effect to aspirin.
That's phenomenal.
Yep, except we just now pop aspirin.
Yes.
Aspirin on its own actually is not as safe as it could be. It actually will cause gastric ulcers and that. So we've then gone, okay, let's make compounds that are less problematic, because we now know how that works, and that's where you got your non-steroidals like meloxicam and Nurofen.
Yep.
Nurofen is a descendant of these guys.
Well, there we go. And I get migraines and headaches, and so Panadol, Nurofen, and just to know that there would be something in the medieval period that could help with that would be a godsend.
They differentiated between a normal headache and a migraine. They knew they were not the same. Yep.
Yes, wow. Because they're not the same, by the way, if you've ever had either. They are not the same. That's just phenomenal. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for showing us all this. This is just amazing, right? It's just so intriguing and interesting. And thank you for all the research that you do and coming to the fairs to be able to share it with everyone. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hope to see you again. I'm sure I will at either Abbey or here at Croyle Castle. Thank you everyone for watching. I've really enjoyed this video. Thank you once again, Michelle. Hope to see you here on the next video on Shadiversity. So until that time, farewell.